Labrit.
Sveiki?
No. I
But
thought that this could be fun. I just wanted to see the surprise.
okay. Good morning, Labrit. We might leave that in.
Labrit, Christopher.
Good afternoon, Baiba. This episode was really inspired by last week's with a very cool professor, Ram Rao of UTD, a former longtime colleague of the great late Frank Bass. One of the many topics we discussed with Ram was this gap that we see between academia and practice. And at brandLingual, we're always fascinated by these gaps, by these spaces in between. Why do they exist? And whenever you've got a big gap, you will always have a middle. And that middle will often always be very, very, very messy. And so our conversation with him and his 50-year career of examining that shift in his language within his own industry, but then that continued gap and sometimes, I don't know, ineffective exchange between real practice, real application, and then what's actually going on underneath the surface, created all sorts of interesting thoughts. And what we could accomplish together if we came together, might it encourage more shared fluency?
Yes, I do believe that there is something that we can pick up for today's conversation. But before we begin, I just want to say this. Everything we share in this conversation is simply our reflection of what we understand today. Please don't take any of this as some kind of ultimate truth, because there's no ultimate truth out there. This is just a reflection of our current journey or what we have understood so far. And this is a live conversation during which we may contradict ourselves or some of our previous beliefs, and possibly also come into contradictions with you and your own life experience as you listen to this. And we are very aware of that. This conversation is without a doubt only about opening up as much as we are capable of today to a much broader and deeper dialogue with you and everyone inside of the industry. So going back to Christopher's first big topic that he brought into the room about the academia versus practice, or the gap between the practice and academia, whenever I have a conversation with the younger talent who are trying to join the industry or who are already in the industry for 5 to 7 years or something, who are somewhere around mid-level, early senior strategists. Whenever we have these conversations, when someone is kind of like confused, like, hey, why there are so many different contradicting opinions on the internet, or why each strategist has their own way how to do the strategy, why everything is so messy. I always kind of like try to bring these people back to this some sort of very simple idea that in advertising world or in also marketing world, things are quite opposite. How, let's say, universities who are focused on scientific achievements or to succeed on a higher level or to find a higher intelligence, they normally provide training. And the training, when you take the bachelor degree, is more like it goes normally in a way that you take like a 3 or 4 year long program. On a year one, you're learning theory. You are learning how different schools of thought are basically thinking and looking at the same topic. That's your foundation. Then on year two, you're starting to practice with your peers, and you start to put that knowledge into the practice to build up your skills, but in a group setup. And then on year three, you start to practice alone and you write your own final thesis. In advertising world or in marketing world, things are working quite opposite. Like on year one, when you are hired, you are basically put in cold water. Will you swim or will you drown? Like a little puppy dog who is just like trying to somehow get ahead. And if you survive, you get into the group with fellow peers or colleagues working together on the projects, but they are quite similar on the level of understanding about what is actually going on. Everybody's just like trying to somehow survive. And then if you get past that point, you get to this some sort of like It's not anymore even about outside world is anymore pushing you to learn more or understand more, because you have already survived the phase one. So it means that you are approved in advertising or marketing world. But if you have this inner feeling that you actually want to really understand how things are actually working, then normally you are starting to pick up the books and you are starting basically to learn the fundamentals. And what we are trying to bring into this conversation whenever we are talking about brandLingual or what brandLingual is trying to achieve is something that we could almost call like a periodical table, or that there is some sort of very clear patterns or law-like patterns beneath this noise where everybody more or less is operating, or the level where the majority is having the conversation on social media or also in your agency.
Yeah, this big idea of a periodic table in some ways might be an antidote to this splash party that otherwise is being created early on in someone's career. And I love that visual of just a bunch of like early career brand marketers and managers and all just going around like this together, and just all this water in the air and getting in people's eyes and blinding them. Meanwhile, potentially millions of dollars are being spent and people's livelihoods are riding on a lot of these decisions, and yet people don't really know what they're doing. So with a periodic table, it helps you understand the relationships between your choices, which to me is a lot different than just a glossary or a dictionary. Those things can give you definitions, yes, but a periodic table gives you the relationships. And maybe that's why this metaphor feels like a bigger idea. And we know marketing doesn't always work very alphabetically, but it certainly works relationally. So that if you were to say awareness, that pretty much always immediately means funnel. A funnel is going to be thought of or used, right? And so now that you've got funnel, funnel always then connects to like consideration, and then consideration always connects to a specific target audience that you feel like you have to persuade, right? And that P, persuasion, is always going to be connected to then to like a message or a proposition. So it's like all these, whether you know or you're not, you're thrown around these different elements, but each element almost assumes what the next thing might be. And then that becomes like a worldview. And whether anyone shares in that or understands it, or if it's the same thing that's shared among your client or not, that can just add more to the splash and more potentially to the confusion without understanding how things work and giving you a set of relationships. You can then fall for all sorts of different things.
That advertising knows how to sell itself. And before you join the advertising industry, you believe that you will be doing a lot of crazy creative things and you will be working with big brands. And when you enter into the industry and you start to work as a practitioner, you start to realize that the world is upside down. That things are completely different than you expected. That there's no one who will be training you, because you hope that I want to be a strategist and there will be someone more senior who will be training me or giving me some sort of like better, who will give me a clarity about these things. What should I need to do? And then it's like, boom, here's the reality. You are there to basically figure out things on your own. And that's why we believe in brandLingual that if you start from the opposite side and you start by putting those fundamentals in a place before you join the industry, you will immediately become a better strategist on a day one.
Yeah, you'll be inoculated against a lot of the mumbo jumbo, because you won't just hear the word and, like everyone else in the room, just pretend to know what it means. You'll actually be able to maybe even ask more thoughtful questions about what in fact we should all be orchestrating together next. And then what are the set of assumptions that might actually change the work that we do, as opposed to, again, words get thrown around and everyone pretending to know what they look like in practice. And so this is probably a lot less about language policing, and it is way more about language diagnosis. If there would ever be some potential future where everybody is 100% fluent in exactly the same words, I mean, that would have its own benefits. But the idea of that being the only thing that can help, I think, is also a bit of an overstatement. It's like along the way, we just need to slow down and ask, what do we mean by this word? What assumption is inside it? It's like a tiny little machine that leads to the next thing. What action might it produce? And is there any evidence that, in fact, moving forward in that direction is the right way to go? And so if we can just encourage maybe more discipline among people to stop with whatever vocabulary, whatever words they're currently using, the fact that you know anything is a good thing, but then really dig into these things in combinations with other things, with other words and concepts that your team is using. Are they going to come together to create the right reaction? I mean, if you're all wanting something to explode, go viral, and you're all working with hydrogen and oxygen together, you might just put water together, and the explosion under regular conditions might not be what you're wanting. So it's understanding, if you want something to happen and you need an outcome, then having the right combination of your elements going in can increase the odds of that thing then happening. So maybe less about language police and more about just encouraging more and more language diagnosis.
I agree, but I do believe that a lot of people who are listening to this episode will agree that different agencies or even different practitioners are relabeling same old concepts just in a new words or in a new term. They are basically putting a new coat on the same age-old concept. And I do believe that idea about this periodical table also goes back to the point that it's important to know that original term, not the relabeled one. And when someone is basically just saying like, oh, we need more fans to attract to our brand, actually, what you need to understand, they are looking for more loyal consumers for the brand, not that there is some sort of like fans or whatever, brand lovers or something like that. And a lot of these words that are very confusing and kind of being very popular go back to very old concepts that actually are containing or keeping the foundation of a periodical table.
Yeah, I mean, this industry is not confused by accident, right? This mess is not random. I mean, it's been historically produced. I mean, agencies competed by having all of these wildly different fantasies, philosophies, or words: disruption, love marks, 360-degree branding, turbo branding, essence archetypes, pyramids and wheels that, and different things that, and these weren't just tools. I mean, they were products that these agencies felt like they were producing. And so, of course, the industry did not end up with one clean language. I mean, it got so into differentiation that it started creating its own different language to signal just how different we are. And thus we ended up with like hundreds of proprietary dialects, all pretending to be unique. But really, when you strip back these words, it was all essentially STP theory in different cosplay. And then people moved agencies or switched agencies, which we know in industry happens quite a bit, or they switch client brands as practitioners. And then clients changed agencies, and then consultants joined the clients, and then agency people became the clients, and then clients hired ex-agency people. And then students learned one model in school, and then they learned another one on LinkedIn. So at what point do we have to stop individually, collectively, or as a team, top down, bottom out, middle out, to have some reflection, to be mindful or meditate on some of these concepts as you sling them around in your practice, and what the intentions are, and then what it is that you're actually really trying to accomplish?
I would say, like, where's your focus? Because I would encourage not to focus on the aspect I want to be creative or I'm working in a creative industry, but focus more on how to be really interesting and effective. Because by being interesting, it means that you need to understand like how to actually be interesting. And by being interesting in the room with the client, you need to realize that the clients are also reading your mind based on how you talk. Is your mind blurry? Do you understand what you are proposing? Or are you there just to, show some creative ideas in beautiful slides? They can
Yeah.
easily see that through.
You can also hear it in someone's language. We both spend a lot of time with strategists early in their career and then working with people more senior in their career. As soon as you start to hear someone talk about what it is that they do or what they find important or what they're excited about doing, it starts to reveal their own process. You can hear a lot of messy, cloudy thinking as soon as someone starts to open their mouth and talk about these things. And you can, like, to your point, you can see it on a slide, because when all of a sudden, like, awareness and mental availability are being thrown around together as if they're the same thing, but you're still trying to plot it in a funnel, and then you're still trying to measure consideration, it's starting to get really, really messy. The other chain could be, again, if you understand your elements, is that everything bot starts with a thought. So, right, category entry points. As soon as you trigger this, it means, okay, now you're interested in memory, and memory connects to mental availability, and that connects to distinctive assets. And then that's about reach and spread at scale, which then leads to penetration, which much more quickly connects to growth. Once you get those things stacked up with those, that's how those elements start to connect. And that's a very different pathway than when someone said mental availability, but they really meant awareness, because awareness typically always means funnel, which takes you to consideration, to audience, target audience with persuasion. That happens through a proposition and message. And now you need a USP. Right. And so you've gotten very, very, very narrow very quickly, as opposed to the other pathway that actually starts to open you up, and it's more about availability. So when those things are sitting in the same charts and the same language, it's like they're pushing and pulling against one another. One of them is trying to overly focus while the other one is trying to bring more people in. And that just adds to this potential tug of war that's happening on a slide. And some people might not even know it, but once you start to understand these elements, you can start to, well, that's just not going to work. That's not going to work the way you think it's going to work. Just like you can't make gold, you can't spin gold. The alchemy piece of this is it's about increasing the odds of putting certain things together to different combinations, but doing so in a way in which there's some evidence behind it.
But I do believe that this is also a problem on the client side. The clients can come to the agency or to the strategist or to practitioner with a very intuitive client brief or client wish, like, hey, we need more we need to make our heavy buyers heavier, or we need to get more fans or more loyal, buyers to our brand, or whatever is not some other weird thing that clients come up. And in those moments, you also need to have this clarity about, okay, I get from where they are coming from, but I need to kindly and very politely bring them back to the reality. Hey, if you will do this, actually, those things will not make that some sort of like a magical success moment that you are craving for. And I do believe that, again, it's at the core, this conversation is about the order versus chaos. Timelines are kind of incredibly crunched. You need to be very clear. You need to almost be laser clear or laser focused and have this order in your mind about the fundamental principles, because then you can easily know where to spot the problem under a lot of pressure, under being pushed into a lot of stress. You can easily then spot those moments or spot those things that needs to be clarified, or things that are actually not working or will never work inside of your team's projects or on the client's team side. And I do believe that with all this impact of AI in our everyday life, we even more need to become skilled, but we need to also be more focused on meta level understanding. That's my take.
Yeah, the real danger here then becomes false alignment, right? Where it's like people think they're pretending like they know the words, but there's this, it's like the more dangerous meeting isn't where people disagree, it's where everyone's nodding very quickly because they don't have that meta level understanding. It just sounded good. I mean, when people disagree, at least the disagreement is visible. And so you might be able to actually do something about it. Like someone saying, what do you mean by that? I don't think that's right. Why are you saying that? Like that can make for an uncomfortable meeting, but at least it could actually be a more productive meeting because you might have a chance to course correct at that moment. But when everyone just nods at, oh yeah, we need an insight, or yeah, let's go make some of that awareness to get to some of that consideration, or like, yeah, we need more loyalty. We just need people to fall in love with our brand. We may mistake shared vocabulary then for like shared meaning. And that's really just false alignment. I mean, a false alignment is then super expensive. And again, time is the one thing we don't get back. And time is still too often the thing that agencies feel like they have to charge for, as opposed to a value-based or outcome-oriented compensation model. But the team leaves the room thinking they agreed because they don't have this meta level understanding, but each person starts working then from a different definition. So the strategist writes one kind of brief, and then the client measures something else based on the work from that. And in the middle of all of that, the creative team reads it another way. And thus what the client's trying to measure isn't even aligned with the original brief, because that isn't aligned with what the creative teams had in their head. And then the media team is optimizing towards this fourth thing. And then everyone is so surprised when the work and the effects have not accumulated together, because by definition, they're already fragmented. And that fragmentation started with the weakness of the words and not understanding then what these words do in combination and in relationship to each other.
I think that we all have been in those rooms where there are agency people, client side people, potentially research agency, potentially media agency, and whoever else. And then there's going on some sort of big conversation, and you are in a position that you don't understand what actually these people are talking about, because there are some terms that are used, but you are just not fluent in them. And you are scared to raise your hand and ask that kind of dummy question like, hey, what is actually going on? And I do believe that if more practitioners would actually sit down and read the book or try to really figure out the fundamentals, or I could suggest to come to train with us, then there wouldn't be that much of the confusion in the room or in your mind. And again, this is about the chaos versus order or some sort of clarity in your mind, because when you don't understand what the conversation is about, it creates a lot of stress, a lot of chaos. You are in a position that you maybe don't understand what is actually requested from you, and then you start to perform without clear understanding, and you just believe that I hope that it will work out.
Yeah. And for those that think that taking the time to learn is such a luxury, I mean, listen, there's lots of free content out there, high quality free content. I mean, we like to think we're contributing to that with our pods like this, our articles now on Substack and occasionally on LinkedIn, lots of posts on LinkedIn. But then for like €100, you can spend 90 minutes, sometimes longer, with us live and some other like-minded thinkers hashing through one of these topics and getting into the detail and talking about the understanding and the relationships between these concepts. If you want to learn with us for 30 days, then it's up to €1,000 that we can spend active, self-paced time with to work through all of this. And then if you really, really want to dig in and really, really try and achieve some native fluency, then it's taking time with one of our 3 8-week courses. And we're always cooking up new things, or a free ebook that really starts to link to all this. So an accessible luxury. If it's a luxury to you, we want to make it more accessible. And so we want to be like the Godiva chocolate, if you will. It's like, it's chocolate, it's Godiva, it's accessible luxury. And to bring that in for you to kind of snack on and feed from to make your practice better, so that every moment, every hour you bill is going to be cumulatively more effective. And then the hours that you spend throughout your own practice are also like elements that are combining and forming something bigger than themselves. I mean, the last thing you want to have in this industry is to be in it for 10 years, and it's really just 2 years of a splash party repeated 5 times. Every year is an opportunity to grow and to compound your learning. And this is the way in which we've been working through our own careers, and something that we reflect upon earlier. If we could have known these things earlier on, how much more quality time would we have had in our own practices? And so if we can bring earlier into someone's pathway, or maybe if you're completely senior, it's like, again, you still have lots of runway in front of you, how to join a world that is bigger than yourself, that has a shared understanding of how real work works and how to do the right things right. I mean, that's central to this transformation that we want to be a part of at brandLingual.
Yes. I do believe that if you are working in industry, let's say for, as Christopher mentioned, years or so, you potentially feel like I know things. And I'm very confident about how things work. And I'm maybe even cynical about how the sausage is actually made and what people are writing in these very beautiful advertising books and stuff like that. But here's a nuance, at least in my opinion. Don't read books that are written by practitioners, because they will, of course, exaggerate the experience and the success of their career and their campaigns that they have done. But I would encourage you to read books that are more evidence-based. Yes, it's hard to read them because there is this some sort of barrier between the way how practitioners explain their own work and how the academics are talking about these things. Yes, academical language is a little bit harder to read, but it will be more fruitful for yourself and your professional growth in the long term. And I do believe that if you want to stay in the business in the long term, especially in the times now when we all need to improve our AI literacy, I do believe that I'm going back to my previous conclusions that meta level understanding about the topics on the periodical table level is something that is just crucial at the core.
What I love about you and I still having these podcast episodes every once in a while, and our goal is to do this at least once a month, just Baiba and I and Hazel out in the field talking and reflecting, as we can actually start to pull together some of the thoughts from the previous episodes, sometimes with guests that are now even more relevant. If we go back to the great episode with Philip Horvath about transformation, one of his points of view on transformation is it's like a form of death. Like a part of you, an old version of you has to die a little bit for a new version to be rebirthed. And having a deeper understanding of the craft and the practice and how it works, and having a much more observable understanding of how all these things interconnect can be very transformative. And you will remember a version of yourself who would have been sitting in that meeting and saying, you know what, yeah, let's just do it that way. Or just going with the flow because that was the easy thing to do, or the path of least resistance. You'll be reading things and hearing things and start to, oh, I remember what I used to do here, but now I know to do this. And that for some is reinvigorating. I can speak personally to my experience. I mean, it gives you a second, third wind. But I think for other people, that definition of transformation might also be a bit concerning, or it might be apprehensive about, well, I don't want this current version of me to die. But the idea of always growing should be something that in this industry we should be excited by, and something that we're stretching for. And Edmund Zvonags reminded us when we asked him the question about why unlearning and learning is so hard for people. It's because of the sheer metabolic expense, the energy that our brain has to use to work through that. I already went to school. Why do I have to keep learning? And so, yeah, this act of transforming yourself can have a lot of change around it. And a lot of that change is going to take additional energy to work through, but it is worth it. It's like the old, like, no pain, no gain, but you do have a chance to grow and start to reorient and rearrange your practice in more impactful, effective ways.
I think that Philip was the one who also said that transformation happens in your life in two ways, in a positive or in a negative. So in a positive way, it means like you are striving by yourself for some sort of like a new level of understanding, or some sort of like a new version of yourself, also in a professional context. That experience before going through this process is incredibly scary. You need to be very open, and you need to have a lot of courage to actually go through that process. But the negative thing, if you are not going through the process by yourself, in a lot of situations in your life, at least I can talk about myself, is that if I'm not being brave enough, I am just pushed from some other direction. And it's just like, it still happens. It's like either you wanted to do it in a positive way, or you were pushed through the process by someone else. And then it's like, dang it, I should needed to do it by myself. It would be then a little bit easier.
In Heidi Hackemer's episode, she suggested we all should have an ego funeral, which is, it sounds empowering when you listen to her. And she says it's something that we're in control over, right? That we're doing for ourselves, that we're going through this transformation and we're putting this version of ourselves here and allowing this other one to grow. which is great when we're in control of it. But it sounds like ego homicide or murder or something when we lack control and it's being forced upon us from the outside. It doesn't sound so empowering and attractive anymore.
But I mean, like to go through the transformation, it's like, yeah, either you do it by yourself or either you're pushed through the process by just situation in your life, or I don't know, someone is just doing that bigger trainers or teachers work to you. But going back to the point about periodic table as a form to give some sort of a clarity or order in the process, I want to just clarify that in brandLingual, we are not trying to say or give you an impression that we are about one school or the other. We don't believe in the way how people are thinking from a very intuitive point of view about advertising and marketing. There's a lot of intelligence also in this way of thinking. And we are not saying that, oh, only the other school of thought is more prominent or dominant over the other. Trying to figure out where is this kind of like a third intelligence in between, or where is this some sort of like a new way how we actually need to look at these things by keeping both schools of thought open or present at the same time in your mind. And then you become like some sort of like a person who can become an alchemist, who can then work around two opposite elements and still mix them together in a very effective and very interesting way.
Yeah. Hopefully the fluency encouragement and the translation we're talking about and have been talking about for some time, it's not about dilution. It's not about dumbing theory down. It's about making it more usable under pressure of inside out versus outside in. And that's where we feel that third intelligence, that version of bothism, strongly influenced by Dr. Christoph Bormann's papers on the subject. A practitioner does not need to sound like an academic in a client meeting, but they do need to preserve the useful meaning of the theory if they're expecting these combination of elements to actually play out in the way that you want. And then that's the hard part, because if you translate too little, nobody can use it. And if you translate too much, it's possible that you distort something. There's another interesting thing that Philip Horvath talked about. He's been trying to translate into modern times a lot of ancient philosophies and things and apply them to see their usefulness today. And at some point, that translation could add to distortion. So we're not pushing for dilution. We're pushing for a way to achieve that level of third intelligence where you can just almost like seamlessly transfer between the two. And that can allow for more of the theories and concepts and words to actually link together in that alchemical reaction to allow you to get the things that then bigger and then what they actually are. So that difference then really changes the work. I mean, mental availability, for example, it's not just knowing brand exists in a category, which is like awareness. It's the probability that the brand comes to mind in relevant buying situations. And so it's a good example of taking all of those meetings where someone's like, yeah, we need to raise awareness. And it's like, what do you mean? How do you actually action that and get that down to, other than just a throwaway sentence on a brief, how do you actually orchestrate all of your 4Ps and work with your agency to actually find a way to pull that off in a productive, measurable, but also really interesting way? So those are the kinds of differences that really change the work. And that could all be in response to someone saying, brand needs to be more different. Well, maybe the best way for this brand to be different is to simply understand, are we showing up for the buying occasions more frequently than the other brands? And if not, we need to fix that. And by fixing that, that might make us the most different because we actually have that knowledge and can actually then rely on that compound elemental reaction to happen out in the marketplace between entry point and asset and brand and moment and proper media investment. Now you've put those things together, you can get that more explosive combination you're looking for. Got it. Just make the logo bigger. That alone isn't going to change the work.
Yeah, I do believe that going back to the point that I raised earlier, that don't focus on being creative, focus on being more interesting and more kind of like effective. I do believe that you can only achieve this by being fluent between these two languages, by being almost like a slider of yourself, or almost like being a 5-star, I don't know, Michelin level cook or chef that can cook food for someone who has very average taste buttons or someone who has an incredibly developed and excellent kind of like, taste towards the food. And I do believe that there's some sort of like level of understanding that you can easily shift also the conversation from one side to other is something that creates or that makes a very interesting strategist in the room, or also even a marketer. You become more interesting for your team and also in the room when you are talking even with your advertising agency, because then you know on what level are the other people and where you stand and what you can do and what you can't do, where you can change the conversation in the room and where you potentially can't.
The elephant in this room is that so many of these words are coming in from the dominant English marketing language. And that can become like status costume. A concept arrives in English and suddenly for some it might feel more advanced, even if the idea already existed locally. And then local practitioners feel behind because they do not use the fashionable word in their work. But maybe they understand the practice better than the people using the new fancy term with the strong English label. So then the periodic table should not become another elitist vocabulary. It should do the opposite. It should make the language more accessible, more practical, and more translatable across markets. And I think that then gets past just the use of the words like cosplay and better having that meta understanding of what you would actually then do with that concept, how you would actually work with that. And that's what brings it back down to a more accessible, practical reality. Because when you break down the things to do with it, now you're giving different people with different functions and disciplines something to do together, as opposed to throw around loaded words past each other that aren't landing, like brand love or heavy buyer, more loyal, category entry point. It's like all these things getting tossed around like status symbols, as opposed to understanding the mechanistic assumptions of them all and then realizing how some connect and some don't work together at all.
Yeah, I want to just continue on the thought that you shared about talking in different languages, let's say, of course, across the globe, and that people in different cultures understand things differently. Yes, they are. And I even sometimes I can't find some words how to explain particular things to you because there's no expression in English. So I need to somehow put a bunch of words together to just to give you a feeling about what that word actually means. But I don't think that at this kind of stage or at this point where we are like talking about the periodical table, we are kind of just talking about different languages or different words that are used. That's all about this some sort of like a noisy surface level. If you listener are familiar with how meditation is actually happening inside of the human mind or inside of the body, is that actually you're trying to slow down your mind, where the mind is very attached to this surface level noise, and you try to go deeper and deeper and deeper, where you start to just see purely what are the key things. And that's where I do believe the periodical table actually sits. And that's where also these two schools of thought lives. It's not about these relabeled terms on the surface level, but it's more about these two very opposite views, and then to trying to figure out how to translate and navigate between them, and how to be, as I said, like a slider or a professional chef, or maybe if you are more a music, that you are like a very, very good DJ who knows when to put the right beat in the music. And it's about those things that you just need to know what is actually at the deepest level, at the bottom of the noise of everything, what is beneath it all.
Yeah. And then it acts like a change management tool, not just a vocabulary quiz, right? So the periodic table is really like, it wasn't a language project in chemistry and science. It was really a change management project, because the language actually changes what people notice. And once people start to notice different things, they start making different decisions. And the words then change the path, so that the table and these things we're talking about isn't just decorative. It's actually a way to intervene in the work to get to different outcomes. Yeah. So a lot of this is about change management, which Also takes us back to Philip Horvath's great episode where he speaks to the difficulty around that alignment around all that. But yeah, that's, I think, the higher fidelity outcome of all of this is actually intervening in the work to get to different outcomes and not just using the words to look smarter or to confuse someone.
Yep, and especially in the context of AI, when you can easily get a lot of information with the one prompt, but then comes the question how to quickly digest what is chaff and what is a grain, what is truth and what is, let's say, hallucination or some sort of fictional fact that AI has put together. And to distill these things, I still believe that you need to have a meta level understanding about the core concept.
AI maybe won't solve the marketing language problem. It might actually amplify it, particularly if it's trained on what's most available in the industry's existing language. And the existing language is full of a lot of old assumptions, a lot of mythology, lots of recycled frameworks, and maybe overly confident definitions that don't always cash out into a better outcome, better practice. So it could be, purpose, personas, differentiation, awareness, emotional connections, brand promises, and things like this. Not all of which are useless concepts, but like the way it would start to map them together would start to then, again, the change management it would be encouraging would be about maybe overly focusing and nichifying and narrowing and cutting down and slicing and dicing. And so it sounds fluent because it's statistically fluent from an LLM perspective, mapping these words together in a predictable way. But fluency in that way, predictable, is not the same thing as correctness operationally. That means practitioners need better language judgment, not less, having that critical thinking lens on. And so this periodic table concept could become a tool for really prompting and checking AI so that you become, again, more inoculated against the less effective recommendations it might kick out to you. So what worldview is this answer really using? What assumptions are actually inside it? And is there a better evidence-based translation to know that that phantom bridge it's asking you to walk down is in fact 2 or 3 times more sturdy than what you think it might be? Then we're having a fundamental understanding and your ability to be a more critical thinker as AI starts to spit out different answers and responses is also going to make you a much more impactful practitioner.
I like what you mentioned, the frameworks, and I will put another word next to the word frameworks models, is that whenever we see that someone is putting on LinkedIn like a open post with a picture or PDF and there's a framework, you can see a huge engagement under those posts and everybody just gets excited and hyped. Oh, I got a new free tool in my toolbox and you will start to apply it. And then you suddenly have a folder with hundreds of those frameworks in one place. And I was one of those people a long time ago until I started to realize there are some patterns and there are actually a lot of those frameworks and also tools and templates and whatever people are putting together just to present themselves as smart that they don't make any sense. And when you start to see the real patterns behind those things, you start to also understand where those things go wrong. But if you don't have that understanding, you are just like, oh, free framework, free something, free template. I will just put all of that in my folder and I will be like a very well equipped strategist, which is not truth. It is a big lie, an illusion.
An illusion, which leads to a delusion. Use of or practice. If we wanted to throw in one of our brandLingual frameworks into the mix now, you can find this in episode 4 podcast, but you can also find it very simply in downloading our ebook where we say it's our 4 questions. Every time a marketing word appears in a meeting, ask 4 questions. What real world behavior is underneath the word? What mental model does the word imply? What action will this word now make us take together? And then what does the evidence suggest tends to work at scale when you put these combinations together? So if that word cannot survive, or that concept that was just dropped into a meeting or whatever can't survive those 4 questions, it's probably just some like meeting decoration. I mean, it may sound strategic. Again, it's like the cosplay of these words, but it's not yet operational strategy. So check out the ebook, The Messy Middle and How to Mind the Gaps in Between. And that's one of those very practical 4-question mantras you can go through whenever you're confronted with something new or maybe in something borrowed or familiar. Like go back and put those things through that analysis and see if they hold up.
Link in the description.
This will happen. Okay, so again, the chance to reflect opens up new gateways, and the idea that you brought in about how this is really properly done is when someone takes responsibility for this themselves and says, you know what? I do have new things to learn. I do have an opportunity to grow. And if things are shifting in the industry and there's this like dialectic battle between these different belief systems, how do I get ahead of this? How do I take responsibility for my own time in this industry to get better informed and understand things on my own, instead of it being forced upon you, or you all of a sudden find yourself in this very uncomfortable situation where you feel like you don't have any agency. And now, yeah, you're under duress, you're under stress. And let's face it, the amount of energy it takes to learn and unlearn is actually high. And so you really have to dedicate yourself to that practice and say, you know what, I can do this. I can do this at my pace. And maybe there's others out there too who want to be doing this alongside you.
Yeah, I think that what I mentioned earlier about when we were talking about the transformation, I think there are two things. One thing is that if you want to do it by yourself and you feel like you are kind of like ready to do it, because normally we feel like we are ready to go through the transformation, there is this inner feeling if we are not already been pushed, is that it's always a little bit just easier if you have someone that we could call as a teacher, trainer, guide, some sort of therapist in training process that could help you to see that there is not just a black tunnel with no maybe light or very little light at the end of the tunnel, and it will be just a very hard period of time in your life while you will be going through this process, but that there is but someone that you would have someone who would encourage you to give a try to this process because that person has went through that process and they know that it is actually incredibly rewarding to get on the other side of the tunnel and to see that light suddenly by yourself and experience that feeling. And in the context of training in general, I do believe that it can also be a group of other people who can be there and encourage you also in it through your learning process to just to, be other fellow learners who are potentially at the same place in their own learning process, and you just have someone with whom you can talk. So they can also help you and support you as a community or as a group of fellow learners with whom you can also bounce the questions, or you can share your reflections, or you can also share your struggles, and those people could be there to support you. So there are almost two different ways how you can think about the process of transformation, or the transformation in the context of learning new things or learning hard things. And the other thing which I wanted to bring into this conversation to conclude a little bit is that, yes, the learning process is incredibly hard because our mind is using a lot of energy to process the information, to some sort of reflections, to encode that information, to change thinking patterns that we have created or developed so far. And the process takes a lot of energy out of us, and you will be exhausted and it will be very hard. But as I said earlier, it's just that it will be super rewarding in the end when you will be on that other side of the tunnel.
Yeah, I mean, we created brandLingual because we feel so many practitioners are trying to learn a lot of these ideas alone. They read the books, they save the LinkedIn posts, they nod along to the theory, but then they go back into their rooms and Zoom calls where everyone's still speaking maybe a different marketing language. We're here as a place to really help practice that translation. Courses, conversations. We're certainly not just a podcast. We got tools, debates, expert series interviews, ebooks, and a community where it's okay to say, I'm still figuring this out. And I think that really puts the .co and brandlingual.co. If that sounds like you should come and join us, and we can all work through this in the messy middle together.
Yes, because brandLingual is basically offering both things. If you want to have a group of fellow learners, you can have them in our community platform. Or if you want to be more connected with people who are in their space or in their professional career, we are also providing a list of experts with whom you can also have a conversation and who can also be part of your learning journey. And it's not just about Christopher and I, but there's a bunch of other people that we have already engaged in our brandLingual universe.
Yeah. So if you're trying to learn and unlearn maybe some old habits or create some new habits without becoming that strategist, come find us at brandlingual.co. Bring us your messiest questions. We like those the best.
Thank you very much, Christopher, for the conversation. It was my pleasure to reflect about things that I think that we are now talking about for some time. And yeah, it was, I do believe, something interesting. At least I said at the very beginning that I may contradict myself. I do believe that maybe I did contradict myself at the very beginning of the conversation.
More evidence for the messy middle and just how much it can be. But again, it's always great spending time with you. And please catch us in our next episode. We drop these fairly regularly every Tuesday around 5 p.m. Central European time. And again, if you need any more information, you can reach us at hello@brandlingual.co. Hit us on the website. We're also quite active on LinkedIn and our new Substack account too, where we're posting more and more articles along the way to give you better entrance into all the different things that we're talking about. So yeah, appreciate your time, Baiba, and look forward to seeing you all again.